What's up, everyone? This is Andre from Indie Arts Midwest. And as the title says, yes, you are indeed setting up your suspension springs wrong. Now, this isn't to take away from any of the currently available tutorials, but there is one slight misstep in terms of setting up the spring itself. I can firmly say that beyond that, the remainder of the setups are fine, but there's something about how these deform in terms of maintaining their volume that I personally have an issue with, and I have these three examples to show you as to why. So, if we take a look at this screw modifier here, we will see that if you set the screw offset to a min and max, it maintains its volume. But if I were to apply this modifier, then that volume is lost. Same thing goes for this spiral. Now this is set up as a shape key so that I can have a state of squash and a state of stretch. But yet again, if I apply this and convert it to a mesh, the shape key is lost, and then we are left with just a mesh with shape keys that we now have to reapply. And upon trying, we will see that it does not transform in a way that is appealing yet again. So I view this as unusable because if the object cannot maintain its volume, then the shape key is useless for game engine use. However, maintaining the Blender side of things, it works perfectly fine so long as you're staying within the confines of Blender. This modifier here is basically the same as the spiral, as you can see. The only difference is that it has a skin modifier applied, which makes it look similar to the spiral. In fact, the only thing that makes them different is the fact that this has a shape key and this is a solid mesh. And yet, if I were to scale this on the z-axis, we run into the same problem. So that being said, we need a better solution that is export friendly for game engines. But what I'll do is split this tutorial in half so that we have the Blender side of things and the Unreal side of things so that we can get the best of both worlds depending on which direction you choose to go. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so we have a new Blender file open, and the first thing I'm going to do is go to Edit, Preferences, click on this search tab here and type in Extra, and make sure that the Add Curve Extra Objects is enabled. And then I will press A to delete everything in the scene. We will then Shift A to add a curve and scroll down to Curve Spirals, Archimedean. Open up this menu. For turns, we want 12, steps 8, radius growth 0, radius of 2, and a height of 1. We will then select Bezier and Auto. Then tab to Edit Mode so that we can now view our newly created suspension spring. And then press 1 to go into front view. Next, we will right click on the spring, convert to mesh, and then we will go to the modifier tab, add a skin modifier and a subdivision surface, which we will set smooth, then apply and apply. Great. Looks like a suspension spring already. And then we will go back to front view pressing the 1 key. Next, we will Shift A to add an armature, enable grid snap, grab on the Z axis to bring it down 1, go into edit mode, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit and extrude all the way to 1 Blender unit above where the spring is. So it's about a little over half, but either way, one blender unit above. We will then select the larger bone of the two, right click, subdivide, and we want 7 cuts, which should give us a total of 9 bones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Great. Next, I will select this bone here and give it a name, which will be B underscore root. And we will go to bone number 8. For some reason, these are named oddly, so I'm not sure why that is, but next we will go to this bone here, and in relations, we will disconnect it and then work our way up to the top and disconnect everything above it as well. I will control tab and go into pose mode. And just to make sure that it's working properly, I'm just grabbing G and ensuring that they are indeed separated. But of course, when we get to this one here, which is just above the root bone, it does not move as the others do because it is the only one that's connected to it. Great. So I'm going to control tab. So next thing I want to do is save. And then I want to select the mesh and then the armature, grab on the Z axis, and then Control A, location, rotation, and scale. Followed by selecting the mesh and the armature, and then Control P with automatic weights. Now it's at this point where the tutorial gets split into 2 parts. So what I'm going to do is shift duplicate, and I'm going to go ahead and hide the armature 001 and the spiral 001, primarily because some of the inputs that I provide for Blender scale versus Unreal scale will be different and have an effect based on their overall scaling. So what we're going to do is, if we're working in Blender scale, we will Control Tab and we'll bring this up here. What we want to do is go into the dope sheet, action editor, right click and go to horizontal split, add a timeline so that we can kind of keep track on where we're at. We will set this to 120, then press A to insert location rotation. Next, we will jump up to frame 30 and we will select the third bone, and we want to grab on the Z-axis minus 0.4, and we'll just work our way up to the top with that same setting. Grab Z minus 0.4. Great, so it's squished in, but not too much. So with that, I will press A and insert location rotation. And then I will select this first frame and shift duplicate and move it over to frame 60. So as you can see, this is its default compression, which is 0 to a -1 compression, we'll call it, then back to 0. Then we'll jump up to frame 90 and we will do the opposite. So we'll select the third bone here, and then we want to grab Z 0.4. and then work our way up and basically do the same thing to the top. Cool. Then we want to insert location rotation, select this frame here, shift duplicate, and bring it over to frame 120. And the last thing I want to do is press A to right click, go to interpolation mode, and set to linear. So when we play the animation, it should be smooth without any slowdowns at the end of each frame. Great. So we have our squash and stretch, which looks good. And we'll also want to create a inverse kinematic so that we can bend this. So what I'll do is duplicate this, and then we will rename it to side to side. We should have two animations here. I want to press A and delete. Great, which makes the animation go away, and we'll just select it again. And then we just press A to make sure we still have all of the bones selected, and insert location rotation. And so we will then select this bottom bone here, and we will shift select the top one, and then shift control C to create inverse kinematics. And as you can see, if I were to rotate, it does it on a very extreme basis. So what we need to do is select this top bone here, go to the relations, and change this to 8. And that should make it a lot more subtle. Though the higher up we go, the more extreme the bend. So the next thing I want to do is press A to insert location rotation. And then we will jump to frame 30. We want to select this second bone here, which we will rotate -30. And then the one above it, I'm going to rotate -10. Press A and insert location rotation. Jump to frame 60, and we will select this keyframe here. Shift duplicate, bring it over. So now it's at its default. We'll jump to frame 90. Select the second bone, rotate 30. One above that, we will rotate 10. Press A, insert location rotation, and then shift duplicate to grab and bring to the 120th keyframe so that it cycles back to its default form. And then of course, A, right click, interpolation, linear. So we get a nice smooth transition between the left and right. And now we have our side to side. So we have squash and stretch, and side to side. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and save. And that essentially completes the Blender side of animating this armature. But now we can move on to the Unreal side, which is at a much larger scale. So what we would do is go to the scene properties, units, and set the unit scale to 0.01.